This is 7.5. Its body fat percentage is relatively low. We'll use it as an example. I can show you its lateral raise. Take off your shirt, then first turn your back to everyone, then face everyone, and do a set of lateral raises. Let everyone take a look. I'll teach you how to observe, how your clients can keep their chest straight when training chest, shoulders, back, and arms. You need to know what mistakes are being made so that in your future teaching, you can help your clients avoid these errors. Then, when you help them push out the movement, they'll be able to maintain the correct form. Go ahead, face everyone and do it. When he was doing it at noon, every rep was initiated by the upper trapezius. Do it normally. Now he's corrected it. All right, now turn your back to everyone. At noon, I offered my sincere praise to those students and remarked that they were actually teaching textbook mistakes. Although he has corrected it, the coordination of his thoracic spine still hasn't fully recovered. All right, now you do one. When he was practicing with me at noon, he said, "Teacher, I used to be a soldier for 5 years." He asked, "Is my straightened thoracic curve related to this?" Yes, generally people who have served in the military, especially those with a military background, tend to have a straightened thoracic curve. All right, go ahead and sit. He was the hardest to correct when practicing at noon. You should change it to a recommendation. Now change it to a push. He's started, and he's already consciously controlling it. Then at noon, she told me, "Teacher, I have a habit of lowering my head when I practice." I said, "If you lower your head, you need to see what movement you're doing. If you lower your head when you shouldn't, you'll end up training incorrectly. So you'll notice that his chest is okay, but compared to his chest, his shoulders are much weaker. He simply can't build up his shoulders because whenever he does any shoulder exercise, whether it's an overhead press, lateral raise, or front raise, he always does it like this. He always does it this way, and you can't build muscle like that. The more you train like this, the more developed your upper trapezius will become, but your shoulders just won't grow. Because your upper trapezius will always take over from your deltoids when exerting force. Moreover, it also easily leads to popping sounds or impingement. Many people ask if their shoulders aren't getting bigger, or if only professional athletes can build broad shoulders. That's not the case. It's because you've never done it correctly, and you always let the wrong muscles take over. Now, let's take a look at this. All right, go ahead. Yes, let's do some standard lateral raises. After a few reps, it starts to show. Let me explain. When doing lateral raises, it's not about puffing your chest out completely like this, doing it this way. Nor is it, as you often see on Douyin, where people say you should lean your weight forward a bit when doing lateral raises, like this. That's not correct either. Actually, when you do lateral raises, your thoracic spine should move in coordination. As long as you control your head and neck, your thoracic spine can move along with it. For example, watch this. When you lower the weights, don't restrict your thoracic spine, but also don't completely relax when lowering them. At this point, your thoracic spine will flex, but because your chin is up, your lumbar spine won't flex. However, if you tuck your chin in, it ends up like this. Your lower back arches and your erector spinae muscles stick out. So when you initiate the movement, you end up lifting like this. That's why many people do lateral raises this way. This isn't proper linkage. You're linking your upper trapezius and erector spinae instead. So when you do it from the front, it looks like this. Just control it like this and you'll be fine. At this point, all the tension is on your deltoids. To be more specific, if you want to train the front half of your lateral deltoid, grip tightly with these 3 fingers. If you want to train the rear half of your lateral deltoid, grip tightly with these 3 fingers. When you're working the front half, your arm and dumbbell start from the side. So if you want to train the front half, but if you want to train the rear half, start with the dumbbell in front of your body. Because in this way, the rear part gets stretched. You can think of the lateral deltoid as being divided into 2 halves. The front half functions like the anterior deltoid, and the rear half functions like the posterior deltoid. You can understand it this way. So, when your hand and the dumbbell start in front of your body like this, you immediately shorten the front half of the lateral deltoid. Once it's shortened, you can think of it as being activated. So when you continue to raise your arm out to the side, you're using the part that's stretched in the back. In other words, you're training the rear half of the lateral deltoid. So you see, it depends on what your goal is. There's no right or wrong. If you want to train the front, for example, if you're doing physique competitions, you're mostly facing forward. So at this point, when you do lateral raises to the side or use cables from behind, you're actually working the front part. That way, when viewed from the front, your shoulders look fuller. But if you're doing traditional poses where showing your biceps from the back is important, then in that case, you need to focus on that. When working the front, it's especially easy to flex your hips, but you shouldn't do that. So at this point, after tucking your chin, bring your thoracic region forward. This way, it suppresses the activation of your upper trapezius. During the lift, it's the rear half of the lateral deltoid that's working. However, many people make a basic mistake. When you bring your arms to the front, you want to train the rear, right? But then you end up gripping tightly with these 3 fingers, gripping tightly with these 3 fingers again. So at this point, you don't feel right. So how can you get these 3 undercover fingers to work? There's actually a lot to it. You need to learn to adjust many subtle details. If I want the rear fingers to be the undercover ones, look, if I do this, the rear fingers open up, and if I do this, the rear fingers grip tightly. So we lower the dumbbell a bit, and then the rear fingers grip tightly. After gripping tightly, I bring it to the front, and when I start the movement, it's always the rear 3 fingers that are gripping tightly. At this point, when I fly, the force from the rear will be much greater. If I want the front part to contract more, then at this point, I need to find a way to engage these 3 fingers. In this case, I start the dumbbell movement from the side of my body. When I start the movement like this, most of the effort is focused on the front. This way, it's the rear half of the lateral deltoid that's working. After you finish a set like this, whether you're showing off your shoulders from the front or showing off your shoulders from the back, at this point, the muscle forms a continuous ring all the way up to your face. This way, you can precisely target and sculpt the details of any specific area. That's why the thoracic spine's coordination is so important. It's crucial for the connection. So how can you achieve thoracic spine coordination? It's determined by your head and neck. Some people ask if it has anything to do with the feet. Of course it does. But why don't their shoulders get much bigger? It's because they've definitely done a lot of seated shoulder presses, seated Smith machine presses. If their footwork is poor, sitting down doesn't affect them, so they should still be able to build big shoulders. They've done both standing and seated exercises, which means that besides the feet, there are other factors involved. So it comes down even more to their head and neck. That's why many people feel nothing when doing standing presses, but feel it when doing seated presses. At that point, it's actually your feet. If you do both standing and seated presses, seated lateral raises with plates, and standing dumbbell lateral raises, and you do a lot of fly movements, a lot of front raises, but your shoulders are still small, then it's not a problem with your shoulders themselves. It means there's definitely something wrong with your form when training shoulders. The 2 areas most likely to have issues are your grip and the coordination between your head and neck. The control of your head and neck determines the movement of your thoracic spine. But most people do lateral raises like this. That is, the thoracic spine becomes rigid. Either they lower their head while doing flies, or they lean their body forward. Usually, women like to do it this way because they think it makes their butt look better. Right? Most women just prefer to do it like this. If you keep training your shoulders like this, causing them to get impinged and make popping sounds, you won't be able to grow your deltoids, especially if you've attended a lot of those women's body sculpting classes. Those instructors mostly just teach you how to pose, how to stick your chest and butt out, and how to use light weights with high reps. But if you keep doing that, how can you possibly build muscle? If you take a piece of straw and move it 1,000 times, you'll feel sore, right? But soreness has nothing to do with muscle damage or muscle growth. This leads to a lot of people who have no experience but are full of enthusiasm entering this industry, and as soon as they start, they learn this kind of training. Then they equate soreness with muscle damage, muscle growth, and a good physique. As a result, they end up training themselves to be stiff and rigid with heavy, blocky muscles, and their shoulders gradually start to get impinged. Once you understand these underlying principles, it becomes much easier when you train to avoid these detours.